Many summers ago, I saved a small bird who fell out of a chickadee nest. The poor thing had been rejected by its parents, and all my attempts to put it back were in vain. They didn't want it. They actively attacked it. Instead, I took the little fellow home. I fed him with soggy rice, cereal, and hard-boiled egg yolk through an eye drop. I kept him warm with the UV light and nursed him back to health. It was the summer before I headed off to college, so I had plenty of time to care for my new bird friend. My girlfriend was less than amused. She thought it was creepy. It was soon made apparent that this was no ordinary chickadee. It had the body of a vulture, the head of a hawk, and the black feathers of a crow. It was a lovely, cuddly little bird, but no chickadee. No wonder they rejected it. The bright red eyes didn't help. Later that summer, I let him go free. He was off to pick his own earthworms and find a new family. My girlfriend at the time did something similar. Out of the two of them, the bird was far more courteous. That bird has stalked me for years. When a family of seagulls were making a mess of the hood of my car, that bird came in and scared them off. It stopped a pair of cats from making a massacre at my bird bath. It scared the neighbor's dog into shutting up, and it has been leaving me little gifts outside my house every month or so. Mostly nickels and dimes, but sometimes a lost bike key or a watch. I've kept one of those keys on my keychain as a memento. I called him Red because of his red eyes. Last time I saw that bird, he must have been about 4 years old and larger than most cats. Beautiful creature and smarter than a dog. He could recognize his name and caw in response when I called out to him. Sometimes he'd sit outside my window and watch TV with me. I once let him in and he sat next to me through the entirety. Dude, where's my car? He even mimicked the Andine skit and stole my popcorn. Cheeky bastard. For the past few years, I haven't seen Red. I figured he flew off with a family of his own. I've talked to a few ornithologists about what kind of bird he was, but no one had a straight answer. Some said a black vulture, but those don't caw or mimic voices. Some say it was a crow, but crows have a distinct shape. It wasn't a falcon or hawk either. They don't have that kind of vulture neck or sideways facing eyes. I figured Red was just Red. How he ended up in that chickadee nest was a mystery in the first place. Then again, since that summer I saved him, I haven't seen a single chickadee around town. At the start of the 2020 pandemic, I was fired from my job at the warehouse. They couldn't afford to keep me, and there was no discussion to be had. It was just numbers, nothing personal, my shift manager assured me. They let me go, and I stayed in my house for weeks counting my savings. I was in a dark place and spending my days thinking of ways to get back at them all. Burn the place down, trash their cars. I knew it wasn't their fault, but I needed an outlet. I got that outlet at the bottom of a bottle. At first, I just started siphoning my food budget into a drink budget. Over time, it just became my drink budget, with a side order of a hamburger every now and then. It wasn't pretty, but what the hell are you supposed to do when you're out of love, job, and friends? I remember one night when I was sitting in the park, finishing a bottle of punch and rum. The full moon was up, and all I wanted was someone to sit with me. Someone to take the drink away and tell me things would be okay. I just wanted to see Red again, watch a movie. Dude, where's my car? Totally holds up. At one point, a dark-haired man passed me by, and I thought about just yelling at him to keep me company. I didn't, though. Instead, I curled up in a ball and fell asleep on the bench. In that hazy moment between awake and asleep, I could have sworn I saw a pair of red eyes looking down at me from the branches. I'd kill those fuckers, I muttered, half asleep. I'd kill the whole bunch of them. I woke up to a pair of police officers poking me with their nightsticks. I had to come down to the station. As they led me out of the park, I could see warning tapes set up at an overpass at the other side of the park. 2 police cars were parked there, flashing lights, but no siren. Something had happened. A murder, it turns out. I didn't have much to say to the officers who interrogated me. I sat there for hours, answering the same questions over and over. But hell, they got me a nice chicken parmesan sandwich for my troubles, and a Coke. At the end of the day, I asked if I was under arrest. Of course I wasn't. Don't leave town anytime soon, they said. I would if I could. Turns out the murder victim was the shift manager at the warehouse. One step under my former boss, Kent. Stabbed 16 times. His wife had been waiting for him in the car. When he didn't show up, she went looking. Needless to say, she found him. I was a suspect. I was in the vicinity, and I had a connection to the victim. A motive. Then again, this isn't a big town, and a lot of people had connections to the victim. Pretty much everyone who lived on that street knew him, and the police weren't sure the wife was completely off the hook either. After the masked murders in the next town over, they were afraid something had spread to us. I was more worried about how to afford my next drink, or if anyone who knew me had seen me escorted away by the police. Being found drunk in the park, on top of being suspected for murder, wouldn't improve my employability. A few weeks passed. The wife of the murdered man disappeared suddenly, and the police now considered her a prime suspect. They thought she was trying to make a run for it. I had my own suspicions. I didn't think she'd be dumb enough to run. If she actually did it, she would have tried something different. This whole thing felt off. And thinking back on that night, I was getting more certain I'd seen those red eyes up in that tree. The next night, I was at a bar. I was sipping a single whiskey for hours, trying to make it count. At around 11 p.m., this beautiful woman sat down next to me, early 40s, with the biggest, warmest smile I'd ever seen. As she sat down, she waved at a young woman leaving the bar. Her daughter, perhaps. I was defenseless. I'd been alone and felt unloved for months. She was friendly, curious, and so easy to talk to. We talked about everything from me losing my job to her struggles, moving into a new apartment. I even mentioned red in passing. After an hour of chit-chat and small talk, we decided to take a walk. We talked long into the night, and we finally ended up at her apartment on the outskirts of town. Freshly renovated place. She gave me a kiss goodnight and told me things would work out. And, she said finally, I hope to see you again. I wasn't even mad things didn't go further. I was just happy someone that lovely gave me that much attention. They say all it takes for things to go to hell is just one bad choice. That's not how it works. Maybe it starts with one choice, but it takes hundreds or thousands of choices. My drinking didn't come from one bad choice. It came from hundreds, over and over. The next day, I took a long walk. I was in the best mood I'd been in for months. My mind was far away from the murder of my former shift manager at first. But it didn't take long for something to remind me, in this case, the overpass. My anxiety came rushing back. I was convinced his wife hadn't skipped town. I was thinking, maybe they just hadn't found her yet. That brought out another uncomfortable thought. Why would someone kill the two of them and not my former boss? Maybe they just hadn't gotten around to it yet. I wasted most of that day at home. A few drinks, watching Netflix, sending out a few applications. Nothing big, nothing I figured I'd ever get a response to. I'd been making tiny improvements to my CV for months. It looked as sharp as it was going to get. As the night came around, I decided that I should talk to my old boss in person. It was a dumb idea, but I wanted to make sure he could see there was no bad blood between us. Sure, I'd been mad at him at first, but all of this wasn't really his fault. I felt like I had to clear the air and wish him the best. And yeah, I'd had a few drinks. Not too many, but enough to make me think that was a good idea. Kent and his family lived in a house down by the lake. Great place, practically made for fishing. I took a long walk down that road, passing by 4 other houses on my way. When I finally got close enough to see the house in the distance, I noticed I wasn't alone. On the sidewalk, about 50 feet ahead of me, was a family. A man, a woman, a teenage daughter, and a young son. They were standing together, watching Kent's house from afar. I could only see their silhouettes as they stood in the darkness between spotty light posts. I approached them. When I got closer, they turned around. I'd seen these people before. The father had been in the park. That night when the shift manager was murdered, the daughter had been at the bar where I met... Yeah. The mother of the family was the same woman who took me to her home the other night. She looked so pleased to see me. That gorgeous smile. Had it always been so sinister? The only one I didn't recognize was their youngest son. He looked to be around 10 to 13 years old, with the same black hair as the rest of the family. They were all so symmetrical. Warm, beautiful people. Just seeing them on the street was like something out of a fashion magazine. They all smiled at me in unison. I took a few steps closer, raising a hand to say hi. The kid rushed me and almost tackled me to the ground with a big hug. I'm sorry, who are you people? I asked. You never caught my name? The mother smiled. That's fine. Fine, nodded the husband. Fine, said the daughter. The boy skipped back to his family. They all had the same dark hair, the same pale complexion, the same intense look in their eyes. The mother took a few steps forward. I wanted to run, but I had a feeling I wouldn't get far. I was a gazelle trying to stare down a lion. I had a great time, she smiled. I just wanted to thank you. No need, I nodded. The father of the family didn't seem to care, not a twitch in his stone-like face. I had a great time, too, I admitted. I know you did, she smiled back. She leaned in as if to kiss my cheek. There was something familiar about her smell. Her voice dropped. I'm doing this for my boy, she whispered. I don't care for you. What? What are you doing? She patted me on the back and stepped back. I'm making us even. I looked closer. Under the streetlight, her eyes looked red. The same for the rest of her family. Red eyes, all of them. The father was holding a box cutter. The daughter had a roll of trash bags. And the boy, well, he had a handful of earthworms. The mother straightened out. Something cracked in her back, and she suddenly seemed longer. Almost a whole head taller than me, and she didn't even wear heels. Go home, the mother said, with her back turned to me. I'm sure the next manager will need all the help he can get. I just stammered as the family walked away. The boy stayed behind looking at me. He took a few steps forward into the light and offered me an earthworm. He had this big, goofy, dirt-filled smile, almost endearing. And then, he said, and then what? And then, he repeated, tilting his head. He put an earthworm in my hand, then ran off to be with his mom. I had two options. I could go home and pretend I never saw anything, or I could do something. I decided on the latter. There was no time to call for help. I had to warn them first. I took off running through the adjacent yard. There was a small fence and I jumped it. I'm sure one of the neighbors saw me. I had to try. I almost lost my balance, but I managed to stay upright. I came up on the back window with a view straight into the kitchen. I started banging on the window, almost giving the woman sitting there with her phone a heart attack. There are people coming, I yelled. Call the police, there are people coming. She jumped out of her chair and clutched her phone with a scream. Kent came running down the stairs. The woman was dialing a number and Kent rummaged through a closet in the hallway. You gotta go, they're coming, I urged. Just go. I felt like my heart was jumping out of my throat. I kept banging on the window until I saw the barrel of a gun pointed at me. I'm sure Kent would have pulled the trigger. He would have, but he didn't get a chance. A window on the top floor was smashed, and I could see the tall silhouette of the mother up on the shingles. How the hell did she get up there that quickly? Kent also heard it, giving me a questioning look. There was someone banging on the front door, and another window smashed on the left side of the building. There was a rumble in the air, like a deep caw. I saw the dark-haired father stepping in through a lean window next to the front door. Kent took a shot at him, but it seemed only to annoy him. I'm pretty sure the shot connected, though. Kent's wife dropped her phone in surprise, and I could hear an operator calling out to her. The father held out his arms, as if to make himself bigger, took a deep breath, and screamed. It was the loudest sound I'd ever heard, and it made the windows rattle and crack. His mouth was so large he could have swallowed Kent's head whole. His throat vibrated. Kent and his wife started bleeding from their ears. Mine were just ringing, but the two of them were crawling on the floor, trying to catch their balance. I tried the back door, but it was locked. I went back to the kitchen window, looked away, and smashed it with my elbow. With all the cracks in it, there was barely any resistance. The father was on the ground, cutting up Kent's shirt with his box cutter. Kent's wife was on the floor, holding her ears and trying to regain her balance. I crawled in through the window, looking for the handgun. My pants snagged on the glass, giving me a nasty cut. The father looked up at me. His pupils were dilated to the point where I could barely see any white at all. He had a completely neutral expression. He wasn't cutting Kent, he was taking off his clothes, probably to make the cleanup easier. We just stared at one another for what felt like an eternity. He opened his mouth as if to scream again. I saw the handgun just underneath one of the chairs. I snatched it up and pointed it at him. Suddenly he stopped. Not because of the gun, but something caught his eye. He closed his mouth and stared at me. His eyes were fixated on my keychain. It must have fallen out of my pocket as I crawled through the back window. The bike key I'd gotten from Red. It was still there. The father couldn't take his eyes off of it. You want this? I asked. There was no response. I just went for it. We'll trade, okay? I said. You get the key, I get the box cutter. He tilted his head. Someone was going crazy upstairs. I heard furniture being torn and thrown, glass breaking, and something big was stomping around. I just unhooked the bike key with my trembling fingers. My hand holding the gun had gone numb. Gazelle and Lion, round 2. I held out the key and he was about to take it. He didn't offer me the box cutter, so I pointed at it. Trade, I repeated. Trade, he nodded. Trade. So we traded, and he got up. He inspected the key from all angles and seemed pleased with himself. Trade, he smiled. Kent crawled over to his wife, his shirt split halfway up the back. I could see the dark-haired daughter of the family wander around the hallway until she met the gaze of her dad. They squawked at each other. It wasn't just the sound of humans trying to squawk. There were actual squawks, the kind of sound that made their throats vibrate in a way I'd never heard before. The stomping upstairs stopped, and another squawk was heard. After a moment of quiet, they left the house. Kent's wife had managed to dial 911 before the father blasted our eardrums, and the police were already on their way. I would pay a lot of money to hear the recording from that call. I stepped outside to make sure the family had left, only to see the boy standing down the street. He was holding an armful of sticks and branches, his little eyes reflecting a bright red. I waved at him. He waved back. Then he disappeared up into the trees. A complete vertical lift, up and away. The light posts flickered, soundless. Kent did the best he could to defend me and to explain to the police that I'd helped. The whole thing was classified as a home invasion, and the dark-haired family was put on an APB. Kent was relieved, however. His 2 daughters had been at a sleepover. If they hadn't gone, they'd been upstairs in their beds, being torn apart. It took weeks for my eardrums to heal, and even longer for my drinking to stop. The same way you get stuck making 1,000 bad choices, you can dig yourself out by making 1,000 right ones. But just taking that first step and keeping that momentum up, that requires nothing short of a triumphant spirit. It's a struggle. Kent couldn't just magically get me my job back, but I'm proud to say we've grown into friends. He eventually introduced me to some people that got me working at the local movie theater. Now I run the projector, clean and greet people. Probably the best job I've ever had. You come to one of my shows, you're going to have a good time. But I wanted to post this story. I think Red is still out there. Every now and then I find an earthworm on the hood of my car, like an offering. There are still no cats around to bother the birds at the bird bath. The neighbors' dogs are still too scared to go outside and bark. I don't know, I think Red is here to stay. So I wanted to see if anyone else has had a run-in with these people. I found one other story that sure sounds like them, but I'm not sure. It does explain the area where the mother took me that night, though, that refurbished apartment complex. Could be the same place. Thank you for your time.
If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe for more horror tales.
At the start of the pandemic, I decided to get back into retro gaming. I wanted to catch up on my backlog and try some gems from the past. I posted about it here on Reddit, and I got a few suggestions on what to check out. Using an emulator, I could try pretty much anything. This one guy suggested I play Hatchet Man Cove. I'd never heard of it, and I couldn't find it anywhere. There was an inactive Steam page for it, but there was no available download. Instead, I opted for another game by the same developer called Ch4Nielings. I don't think a lot of people have heard of this game. It's a game for the PS2, but I don't know if it was ever physically published. I found it for the emulator, though. Ch4Nielings actually had a pretty clever concept. It was a sort of reverse game show. You are put in a position where your made-up friend, lover, or parent has been cloned. Every round, you are faced with 4 identical copies of a person, and your task is to find the real one. You have to ask them questions to figure it out. You are asked several personal questions to calibrate what sort of answers you are supposed to look for. You can add as much data to your profile as you want. They got like 500 questions. Based on the number of questions you answer, you get a psychological profile. You can check it out on the main menu. The more data you provide, the deeper and more personal questions you can ask the clones. If you just answer a few, you can't really ask the clones that much, and it gets a lot harder. The first night I booted up Changelings was a lot of fun. Filling out your profile unlocked more and more cosmetics, so I made it a point to answer all of them. It took almost an entire night, but after that, the answers generated seemed eerily human. The game had a bit of an uncomfortable atmosphere. The colors were toned down and the characters had this robotic, auto-generated text-to-speech thing going on. It all took place in this sort of funhouse laboratory setting, with strange mirrors and sterile walls. The main menu was a lab that you had to walk around in to get to options, start game, credits, and all that. Also, there were tank controls. Thanks, Resident Evil. Once I started playing the game, it became apparent that this wasn't just any old game. You could ask the clones weirdly deep questions, and they would answer as best as they could based on your profile. This meant that as much as you were playing against them, you were also playing against yourself. The better you knew your own profile, the easier it was to eliminate the clones. The clone, being a close friend, relative, or lover, would know you better than a clone. So just seeing who knows you the best, in certain ways, is the way to go. For example, I asked the clones what my favorite type of sandwich was. I got 4 different answers. Your favorite is tuna and oregano. Your favorite is tuna and ham. Your favorite is tuna and mayonnaise. Your favorite is tuna and bell peppers. All answers were tuna, which is what I'd answered on my profile. But the second word, that wasn't part of it. But that's the tricky thing about this game. Based on your profile, it makes an estimate about what could be your favorite. So thinking about it, I figured a mayonnaise tuna sandwich would be the correct answer, as it sounded the most true to me and my taste. Nothing was completely wrong, but that was the most right. Still, it was a bit of a gamble. Yeah, I won that round. Tuna and mayonnaise were spot on. The game figured this out just by the sheer number of answers I'd provided. It knew my palate. I've since started making them regularly. It's like the game knew me better than myself. And that's the game. I got really into it. One thing about these older unknown titles is that you actually have to discover a lot of it for yourself. There are no shortcuts or guides. I tried getting the best score, the most elaborate answers, making up the funniest questions, all kinds of stuff. But if the questions were too nonsensical, the game just wouldn't recognize them. You could use preset questions and just put in certain words like, what is my favorite X? What do you think of X? What was the name of my first X? That was the best way to get a good answer. You could make a completely custom prompt though, but you might get an error. Also, it was clunky as hell, as you couldn't use a keyboard or click the letters. You had to move with direction arrows and choose the letters one by one. The game doesn't just let you pick out the character you think is the real one. You must kill off the clones in elimination rounds. It wasn't graphic or anything, they'd just be taken to another room and you'd hear a scream. At the end of the round, with just one person remaining, your character steps into the room. If you got it right, they'll hug you, kiss you, or thank you. If you got it wrong, the character got this strange, grinning expression on their face, and the screen would cut to black. Then, your character would be the one who screams. By day 5, I discovered a glitch. You could bug out the game by putting a question within a question. If you did, the clones sort of spazzed out, and you got a full score as if you'd won the round. This score could be used to unlock cosmetics and new sets. It kind of messed with my score though. See, the game never really stops working on your profile. Whenever you ask a question, it analyzes it. If it recognizes what you're asking, it uses that information in establishing your profile. If you ask a lot of questions about your past, it might take that into account. Same with questions about work, relationships, the future, and other themes. The game really feels like it tries to get to know you, but with corrupted scores, the game started bugging out. For me, the strangest thing was starting a new round, and the clones were just gone. Just an empty room, with no one there to answer my questions. Other times, all clones would just stand there with a big grin on their face, all saying the same answer. At one point, a clone backed out of the kill room and just got back in their seat without a head. Despite all this, I reluctantly got into it. It was strange to reverse answer questions about myself. It felt like I was teaching the game who I was. Hell, I didn't even mind the bugged out stats. In some cases, it just added to the atmosphere. I took short breaks every now and then, but came back to try out a new strategy or to see if I could get a new unlock. I also got into the lore of the game, trying to find secrets hidden in the main menu room. There were a few folders and videos. Folders told the story of a pharmaceutical company who were trying to perfect an algorithm for spotting imposters. A series of in-game cutscenes told the story of a team who'd unleashed something horrible and were looking for a way to circumvent an upcoming disaster by building a protocol. The game took place in the 70s, so it got some of that analog horror vibe going. 2 weeks into playing it, on and off, I unlocked a character called the Boss, who was the final archetype of Chfangaling. Boss was by far the toughest one. She did this thing where all the clones had identical outfits, and they'd sometimes switch places if you weren't paying attention. Beating her was an absolute pain. It wasn't just about having a 1 in 4 chance of guessing right. She would sometimes actively make herself suspicious, and then switch places with the original. It was, by all means, the equivalent of a boss battle. I tried using the glitch, but it just didn't work on her. All it did was throw me back to the main screen. I had to power through, grab my notebook, and actually make an effort. She was just odd. When you brought her clones into the kill room, there was no screen. It just got quiet, and the lights flickered a bit. But Boss didn't thank you when you saved her. Instead, the lights just start to flicker, and you're thrown back to the main menu. When I beat her, I got the final unlock, a character called Blameless. While other archetypes had icons of people when you start a new game, Blameless just had some sort of blue-tinted sunflower icon. The tooltip said debug, while other tooltips had at least hinted at a viable strategy. As soon as I started it up, I figured something was wrong. The loading time was several minutes long, and once it loaded up, the game camera was stuck in another room. It took me a few seconds before I realized that the camera had switched to first person, and that I was actually in the interrogation room. To my sides were clones of my avatar, looking at me with those distorted pixel faces. On the other side of a window, I could see the white hair and dress of Blameless, motionless. It was all switched up. The game started asking questions for me to answer, forcing me to defend myself. I figured if I was honest and revealing, the game could figure out I was the real one. So I got into it. I did my best. But the questions were getting out of hand. Some of them were way too personal, and others were just strange. Asking things about my sex life, my religion, my childhood trauma, my fantasies. At one point, I was asked the same question 4 times in a row. Would you kill for your god? At some point, I just felt uncomfortable playing. The clones in the room were staring at me with those creepy smiles. It was the middle of the night, and I'd been playing for hours. I decided enough was enough and stepped away to get a drink. I was standing in the kitchen, Coke in hand, when I heard it from the other room. I said, "Would you kill for your god?" I nearly choked on my soda. The game was paused. I had no idea how to beat Blameless. I'd lose over and over again, and I'd see my character taken into the kill room. The screen would just go black, and then I'd be back at the main menu. I tried adapting to her tactics and listened for clues, but she was so unpredictable. The clones would copy part of what I answered and switch a few words up. Blameless would get it wrong over and over and over. Was she bad at the game? Or did she just want to kill me? Maybe for her, the game was killing the real one instead of saving them. If so, they were really good at it. Or was my character a clone all along? At one point, I just stopped playing. I wasn't invested enough to get this frustrated. I'd gotten all I could out of TERRYFYING, so it was time to move on. However, as I started looking for the next game to play, my phone dinged. Text message. GAMEOVER. I turned off my phone and backed away from my computer. I just stood there, panting. Unknown number. No way. No fucking way. I uninstalled everything. It had to be a virus. I turned my phone off and fetched my backup flip phone. I ran a malware check on my computer, locked all my windows, closed the curtains. Had someone used the game to spy on me? Like a password phishing thing? It wasn't unheard of, and some of my questions could be used to guess the answer to my secret questions. I got paranoid. I'd stop at random times while showering, just to hear if someone was sneaking around my apartment or looking through the mail slot. I thought about calling the police, but seeing as how emulators can be a bit of a gray legal area, I wasn't too sure about it. It'd be too hard to explain. It was midnight when my flip phone rang. Unknown caller. I thought about not answering, throwing it away and just not looking back. But I had to know more. Who was this person and what did they want? What did they really want? So I picked it up. Game over. Same robotic text-to-speech function, same tone of voice. Then the line went completely quiet. No breathing, no moving, nothing. Just a faint electric buzz. I just stood there trying to control my breathing. I felt dizzy, as if I'd suddenly run a marathon. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "To find you. Just play without me. We found you." "What?" "You answered." Well, I thought about my words carefully, but my mind was racing. Who was I talking to? Who was behind the voice? And how could they reach me so easily? Game over. Wait, what do you... Click. The line went dead and the phone shut down. Then my computer shut down. Then the lights. The fridge. Hell, the street outside went black. I scrambled for a flashlight when I heard something. Footsteps. Someone was at the door. I couldn't find my goddamn flashlight. I considered my options. I live on the second floor, so a jump might just break my legs. That won't get me anywhere. I didn't have a firearm, but I could get a knife. With my phones dead, I couldn't call the police. I had to do 1,000 things at once, but that wouldn't change that someone was trying to get in. Before I could fetch a single racing thought, the door swung open. For a few seconds, I just held my breath and listened. There were several people, and I was just standing around the corner, waiting for something to happen. I felt so goddamn powerless. This was my home, my space. As they got closer, I backed away. When they suddenly stopped, I realized I'd been heard. I had too many options to choose from, but I settled on the balcony. I burst through the balcony door. The air was surprisingly cold, and there was frost on the ground. My heart was beating so fast, and I was hyper-focusing on anything and everything. I could barely see anything from the cloud of my breath, but I could see the two people on the other side of the door. They were me. I thought it was a broken reflection at first, my mind playing me tricks. But no, it was me. Different sets of clothes and different hair, but two variations of me. One of them was taking something from my computer, but the other just stared at me with a tilted head. He made no attempt to open the balcony door. If he did, I wasn't sure I'd be able to stop him. We just looked at one another. I could see my mannerisms, my quirks, the way they moved, the way they looked at me. I'd seen it in the mirror every day. They were me. I hadn't even noticed I was screaming. The sound just escaped me. I almost fell over the side of the balcony, trying to get away. It was one of my neighbors who saved me, an old woman on the next balcony over, calling out to me, asking if I was okay, telling me she'd called the police, telling me to calm down, to talk to her. They're in to there, I shrieked. I could barely speak. I pointed right at one of them, and he just tilted his head with a grin. Same creepy grin as in the game, this unrealistic, twisted, ear-to-ear parody of a face. He grabbed the balcony door and slid it ajar. Easily. I put one leg over the railing. They weren't getting me. A broken leg or two was a small price to pay. "You're fine," he whispered in my voice. "We know. You're okay." I could barely hear him over my breathing. I just shook my head. "I'm real," I said. "I'm real and you're not. You're not." He shook his head and closed the door. We exchanged a look. Seconds later, they were both gone. That was it. I told the police the intruders were masked. I told my neighbor I didn't know who they were. I told them I thought I'd been stalked online, and that I didn't know what was going on. Which is true. I still don't. They haven't bothered me since. The game is just normal. It's like the corrupted file just reset itself. In every way, it just seems like everything has cleared itself up. But I don't think it's that easy. Something has changed since that night, since playing Chwongalings. Sometimes when I'm in the bathroom, I get this strange feeling, a mood. And when I look up, I'm grinning, exactly the way they do.
If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe for more horror tales.
6 victims in a span of 8 weeks, and not a goddamn finger lifted. The state prosecutor refused to provide a warrant. The police lacked sufficient evidence. Our state reps stood by the assessment made by health officials. The hospital where I used to work called it a series of unrelated health incidents. And every step of the way were pharmaceutical companies with hands far down our pockets. The hatchet men. Go figure. On paper, it just looked like a complaint. Like not having enough fancy soaps in the bathrooms. But it's hard to convey the sickening feeling of dread that creeps up on you when you see another victim dead on the operating table. Their organs ruptured by hundreds of porcelain white teeth. Spontaneous internalized hyperdontia. Fancy name for teeth growing inside the body. Molars blocking airways. Canines rupturing stomach linings. Blood clots, severed arteries. There is no end to the possible complications. And no one said a thing. I put in my 2 weeks' notice and set off on my own. There had been an outbreak of cases up in Manitoba some years back, but I'd never seen anything like it in the Midwest. Now, there was a cluster of victims in the wider Mankato area, smack dab in the south of Minnesota. I talked to 3 of the families. The victims didn't have much in common, and there was no apparent pattern. It wasn't until I talked to the 4th family that I realized what was going on. I was allowed to check out the room of a young woman who'd passed away when I found that she had a love for nature snacks. Trail mix and raisins mostly, but also something locally produced, honey-roasted sunflower seeds. Something she'd bought from a traveling salesman, produced right here in Tomskog, Minnesota, not sold anywhere else. After 2 weeks of living out of my car, I'd once again been on the phone with the police. They knew me by name, but were no more helpful now than they'd been the first dozen times. There wasn't anything illegal about selling roasted sunflower seeds as a side business, and they had no reason to suspect foul play. Sunflower seeds don't cause people's stomachs to fill with teeth and cut themselves to death from the inside. I couldn't argue with that, but goddammit, I tried. It took a bit more sleuthing, but I made steady progress. I could barely believe my eyes when I found it. The place had the weirdest name. I thought it was a joke at first, but the High House is most definitely a thing. High is actually the word for tooth in the Lakota language, because of course it was. There was a large field where they could grow sunflowers at the far end of the property, and with a name like that, and various sources, I knew I was onto something. And if no one else was going to do anything about it, I'd take matters into my own hands. I refused to see another victim coughing up teeth. The High House used to be a ranch. It was repurposed back in the 90s into a sort of retreat, but the surrounding community slowly got depopulated. Nowadays, only the High House remains. Until I started looking into it, most people just assumed it was abandoned. Getting to it wasn't as simple one might think. There are several unmarked roads that all lead into this sort of circling pattern. If you don't know what to intentionally look for, most people would just drive straight back to the highway. It took me the better part of half an hour to get to the outskirts of the property, even though I knew the roads fairly well. The entire area was protected by an 8 feet tall chain-linked fence, lined with barbed wire and warning signs. There was no doubt that intruders would most certainly be shot on sight. But under the cover of darkness, I still found a way inside. There are spots where animals have crawled under the fence along the sides. It was cold outside, Minnesota weather in late September. A piercing wind cut through my jacket, and my hands were losing their color. There'd been a mild rain earlier, leaving everything damp and chilly. I had to stop myself from slipping on fallen leaves. I'd brought a flashlight, handgun, and a phone, no identification. The clouds parted as I got closer, lighting up the central area of the property with pale moonlight. The house itself was a 70s-style wooden house. At least 15 rooms, spread across 2 floors, 2 entryways, a main one in the front, and a back door leading to a field, a tool shed on the eastern side, and a long series of guest rooms separate from the main building. I think it used to be some kind of stables. The place was falling apart. The grass grew tall enough for me to hide in, and the road leading up to the gate was so cracked that it looked like cobblestone. The windows were boarded up, and there was no sign of any vehicles. I was having second thoughts about this place, but everything pointed me here. Still, I couldn't see much of a business. This was hardly the place for a large-scale operation. It wasn't until I rounded the side of the house that I realized I was on the right track. Right there, poking out of the soil, was a perfectly white molar tooth. Not a big one, but definitely not a pebble. No blood, no bones poking out of the ground, just a tooth. I decided I'd go around the house to check it out from all angles. There were also the guest rooms. Someone could be staying here. I also wanted to confirm sunflowers growing in the fields, maybe take a few samples. The thought struck me that maybe this was all unintentional. Maybe they didn't know what happened to their customers. It might be some kind of irradiated soil or a parasite. But if your customers start to die, then maybe you ought to pay more attention. But that tooth, sticking out of the ground, told me another story. It told me that they knew what they were doing. As I rounded the back of the building, the clouds grew thicker. For a moment, I could barely see anything but the outlines of the property. The sharp corners of the various houses and sheds, along with an abandoned tractor, broken down, and a dried mud pit. I was so focused on the main building that it took me a few seconds to realize the grass feeling different against my cold fingers. I was standing in the middle of the field. It was covered in sunflowers, mixed in with the tall grass, unkempt and untreated. They had a rough texture to them, and just touching them made seeds rattle to the ground, falling haplessly out of the florage. They were ready for harvest. I brought out my phone and started taking pictures. I forgot to take the flash off, so my phone lit up the field like a lightning strike. This was the first time that I saw that the sunflowers were a sickly blue. I grabbed one of the sunflowers and twisted the head off. I put it in a plastic bag and stuffed it into my pocket. I was about to move on when I suddenly heard a strange rustling noise. The stem of the flower that I'd just cut was shaking back and forth. Seconds later, another sunflower was shaking, then 3 more. As heartbeats passed, they all started shaking in unison. I couldn't help but feel that they were screaming. An alarm, a warning, a thought occurred. If this was an alarm, it meant someone was listening. An alarm means nothing if there's no guard. I backed away from the field and listened. The shaking was hypnotic, going back and forth, all in sync. There was no question about it. It was deliberate. Some kind of instinct or intelligence. They weren't mindlessly swaying in the wind. This was a pattern. I didn't want to overstay my welcome. There was no reason to stick around. I wasn't there to handcuff someone, put them in the back of my car. I just wanted a solid lead. The picture I took turned out fine, so I sent it to a friend of mine and told them I'd call later, just in case I lost coverage. That way, the picture would be out there, no matter what. Good thing I did. As the wind picked up, I felt an awful acidic smell, like raw oil mixed with sulfur. There was no apparent source, but I could hear something just outside the fence. A patrol, something moving in the underbrush, coming out of the forest. A low groan echoing from one point to another, spreading like a wildfire. Flock calls. At first I thought there were 3 of them, but in seconds, there were 8, a dozen, 15, maybe more. Groan after groan after groan, guttural rumbling calling out to one another. The sunflower field still shook. I had to get out of there, fast. Crawling on my hands through the high grass, I could hear their groans rising and falling. I scratched my hands on little white teeth growing out of the ground. I knocked a few out by the root, and I swear the earth twitched like it hurt. I reached the main building. There was about 4 feet of gravel lining the edge of the foundation, so I didn't have to crawl through the grass. It barely made any noise over the wind anyway. They were by the front gate, 3 of them congregating. I could only see their vague outlines in the dark. They were tall and had these ridiculously long arms, almost long enough for their knuckles to scrape against the ground. They kept making these strange humming noises, like someone trying to speak with their mouth closed. They'd find me out here without a doubt. I had to hide and wait them out. I considered going back, but I heard something by the corner on the back of the house. Maybe they'd picked up my tracks or my scent. If I kept going forward, I'd get spotted by the three at the front. I could try to get over the fence, but the barbed wire wouldn't make it easy. Besides, there were plenty of them out in the woods. However, there was a slim window leading into the basement right beside me. I could hide down there until morning and slip out once they stopped looking for me. It was my best bet. All it took was a little push for the rotten frame to come loose. I moved it out of the way and slipped inside. I picked up my phone to use as a flashlight, only to see I had just over 30% battery left. I must have forgotten to charge it in the car. The floor and walls were solid concrete. There had been an attempt to cover it up with wallpaper at some point, but it had loosened and rolled up years ago. Left was just this chunky yellow texture, still sticky to the touch. Something crunched under my feet. Looking down, I saw teeth, hundreds of them, various sizes and shapes, milk teeth, molars, canines. Some whole, some broken, some rotten, some with moving, exposed nerves. With every step I took, I could hear something snapping under my heel. I could see them growing by the base of the walls, sprouting like mushrooms. There was a big cluster in one of the corners, with one tooth the size of a thumb. A handful of them grew out of an old rotating fan in the ceiling, the weight tipping it to one side. This made staying quiet almost impossible. I looked around for a hiding spot. There was what looked like an old locker, like something from a gym. At least it was metal, and I could close the door behind me. I took a few steps forward, holding my breath, listening for something to react. At any point, I expected to hear something. A shriek, a voice, a scream. To feel a hand on my neck, a whisper in my ear. But I reached the locker. I had to pull on the door a few times, as teeth loosened and fell off the door. The inside was completely covered in teeth, gathering like a hive of insects, trying to stay out of the light. There was this moist smell like a damp mouth. I just stood there contemplating what the hell I'd stumbled into. Something moved by the stairs. I shut my phone off and stepped inside. Teeth or not, there was plenty of space. I carefully closed the door and curled up into a ball. I felt like I'd crawled into the mouth of a sleeping animal, ready to chomp down and tear me to pieces. I pulled my shirt up to breathe through the fabric, both to stay calm, but also to keep from breathing in too much. This place had to be full of bacteria and mold. My pulse was out of control, and there was something moving outside. Something carefully stepping around the teeth, occasionally breaking one off with a bone-chilling snap. It was stumbling, bumping into furniture. Sudden rattling as piles of teeth spilled across the floor. A hulking, drooling sniffle, like a kid trying not to cry. Ew, it moaned. Ew. Husks of words. A threat? I clutched my handgun tight. I'd taken the safety off 100 times at the shooting range, but this was the first time I didn't even think about it. If that thing came near me, I'd give it all I got. I closed my eyes trying to hear something over my hammering heart. Heavy, crunching steps. Little things falling off shelves. A chair tipping over and shuffling steps trying to recover their balance. There was a sudden quiet. My fingers were tingling as my body screamed for air. I couldn't keep it in anymore and gasped. The locker door burst open. I think it was a man once. Even in the dim light of the basement, I could see his mouth was so wide it almost split his head in two. Teeth covering his entire mouth and tongue, one tooth sticking out of his eye, making him unable to blink, small teeth poking out of his hair and eyebrows, a long canine blocking one of his nostrils. A hand gripped my shirt, little teeth tearing at the fabric, as I was lifted out and pushed. I fell against an old sofa, breaking the armrest. I held my gun up and took aim. Pulling the trigger would mean my time was up. They'd all hear me and come running. But if it was a matter of that, or dying, I wasn't taking any chances. I didn't even know if a bullet could pierce him. The moonlight reflected off hundreds of little white spots. As it stepped forward and reached out to me, I raised my weapon. And as he moaned, I fired. I fired 3 shots, and the thing just stopped. Blood started running out the side of its throat. A line of teeth was missing from the mouth, and there was a large hole in its neck. The 3rd shot went wide. It keeled over, still reaching for me. its hand unfurled, revealing a pristine set of keys. This had been a person. I picked up the keys as blood kept pumping out. The thing on the ground kept twitching, little teeth losing their grip on it as the body died, falling off of him like wilting petals. This had been a person. The thought was alien to me, but I couldn't let it stop me. Not now. I had to go. Something blocked the basement window. A shadow. They were here. I burst into a sprint. I ran through the basement, up the stairs, and through a door. An old dining room with thousands of teeth glittering like little white diamonds. A smell that could only be described as dead bacteria and death. Dozens of canvas sacks, full to the brim with sunflower seeds, ready to be shipped off for preparation. I ran straight for the front door, but turned on a heel. The handle was turning from the outside. I could hear glass breaking, groaning voices as tall beings climbed inside. There was only one way to go, up. Up a flight of stairs, into a long corridor. Lamps covered in teeth, door handles, little bumps under the carpet, frames, photos, knickknacks, all drowned in white spots and sharp edge, and the darker the hallway got, the bigger they were. I didn't look behind me. I didn't need to. They were coming up the stairs. Some of them were tall enough to climb in through the second-story windows. They were surrounding me. Fast. There was a lining in the ceiling, a pull-down staircase. I pulled it with all my strength, breaking part of the ceiling as dozens of teeth rained over me. I climbed the brittle wooden stairs and coughed as pounds of dust fogged up the air. I rushed up, pulled the stairs up, and looked around. A single window leading out to the fields. A small round window with a cross, that was all I had. I went for it. I heard them pull the staircase back down. I heard them climb it, clearing it in 2 steps. I heard their groans and I heard them coming closer. My lungs were burning, but I had to keep going. Even if I had to jump through the window, I couldn't stop. Then I started coughing. My lungs hurt. I lost control of my leg, fell, slid over the floor, and piled teeth in front of me. I barely noticed my bleeding arms. I looked back. I'd been right the first time I saw them. They were just these shades. Solid black voids, at least 8 feet tall, hunched over with long arms that dragged across the floor. It was as if they weren't even truly solid, as they seemed not to break anything in their stride. One of them pointed at me with a long, elongated finger. H-E-L-L-O, it groaned. I spit up a tooth. I could feel them inside my left knee, preventing me from bending the leg. I felt them breaking through the roof of my mouth, the inside of my throat. I tasted blood, and suddenly there was a blur in my eye. I managed to get back up on my right leg and stumble forward, mere feet away from the window. Outside, the field of blue looked sort of peaceful, but the window railing, the cross, it was solid metal. I grabbed it with my hands, but it was useless. I tried breaking the glass, but a spike of pain in my arm took all my momentum. My hands clinked against the glass as tips of teeth broke through the skin of my fingers. They were moving closer. They were breaking me apart. All it took was a malicious will, and the world would find a way to appease them. They were killing me. Killing me. I can't describe the pain, every pore of my skin stretching, a million little stabs, inside and out, my vision narrowing to a tiny pinpoint, solely focused on the outstretched finger. Then a grunt. It was different from the others. The hand pointing at me lowered as the creatures gathered. One of them reverently carried the creature I'd shot in the basement. There was a moment of silence, where all I could hear was myself. I picked up my phone. It took me 2 tries to unlock, and I scraped the screen violently. I called a random number on my contact list and dropped it. I tried saying something, not knowing if they even answered. I tried to ask for help, to ask for someone to come here. But what came out was just this eerie sound. Ew. The creatures turned their attention to me. In that moment, I understood. They weren't completely physical and needed someone to fill the sacks. They needed a farmhand, someone to toil in the field, someone to get their seeds out in the world. And if I didn't comply, they could make everything so much worse. I knew it. I saw it. I don't know if anyone heard me. Maybe no one did. maybe no one will come looking for me. And maybe that picture I sent will be deleted. But a part of me hopes that if someone comes here, some way, someday, that they won't make the mistake I made. I'll hold the keys tight. I hope that they'll listen and help.
If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe for more horror tales.